I was parked at a rest stop outside Dayton, Ohio, when my entire life cracked open. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The sky was that dull winter gray that makes everything feel unfinished. I'd just pried open a dented can of store-brand beans from the Dollar General clearance rack. Cold, metallic, sweet in a way that made my stomach turn, because it wasn't even hunger anymore. It was survival. My 2008 Honda Civic, 200,000 miles, and a heater that only worked when it felt like it, had become my whole world. My bed, my closet, my confession booth. I'd learned months ago that the driver's seat doesn't recline far enough for a grown woman to sleep without waking up feeling like her bones had been rearranged. The phone buzzed on the dashboard, probably another debt collector, or a robot offering an extended warranty for a car that barely deserved the word car. I almost didn't answer. I hadn't spoken to another human in 3 days. My voice would sound like sandpaper, but something, boredom, instinct, the last stubborn strand of hope, made me pick up. Hello? A woman's voice, sharp and professional. Ms. Linda Patterson? My throat tightened. Yeah, that's me. This is Lindsay Martinez from the Anchorage County Records Office in Alaska. I'm calling about your property, parcel 82C559 in North Slope Borough. I actually laughed, a bitter sound that scratched my chest on the way out. Lady, I said, staring at the cracked steering wheel, you've got the wrong person. I don't own property. I don't even own this car. The bank does. They're just slow on the repo. Ma'am, she replied, not missing a beat, our records show you've owned 340 acres since 1998. You inherited it from Walter Patterson when he passed away. Walter, my father's older brother. A man I'd met exactly once when I was 7. Then her voice changed, lower, urgent. You owe $47,000 in back property taxes. If it isn't paid by Friday, 5 p.m. Alaska time, the land goes to public auction. I looked at the $17 on the passenger seat beside a roll of toilet paper I'd stolen from a gas station bathroom. You might as well ask me for $47 million, I whispered. There was a pause. Papers shuffling, and then the sentence that made the world go silent. Ma'am, there are significant oil deposits under your land. The mineral rights alone are valued at approximately $18 to $22 million. The can slipped from my hand. Beans splattered across the floor mat, across my last clean pair of shoes. I couldn't breathe, because 6 months ago, my ex-husband and the woman he'd been hiding behind my back had taken everything I'd spent 22 years building. And now a stranger was telling me I'd been sitting on a fortune, while I was living in my car, eating beans like surrender. Are you still there? Lindsay asked. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Hollow cheeks, tired eyes, a Goodwill shirt with someone else's name on the tag. And all I could think was, how do you find $47,000 in 72 hours when you've already lost everything? Before that phone call, I was already living in my after. But to understand how a woman ends up counting $17 like it might multiply if she stares hard enough, you have to go back to the version of me who still believed loyalty could protect you. 22 years earlier, I was 27 and stupid in the way people are when they still think effort equals safety. I started Patterson Plumbing Services with $800, a used van that burned oil like it drank for fun, and a toolbox my father left me when he died. That toolbox was heavy, not just with wrenches and pipe cutters, but with something else. A message that said, build something. Don't waste what he gave you. I was newly married then. Michael Patterson, my husband, had been my steady place, the person I came home to when my hands were raw from chemicals and my shoulders ached from lifting water heaters into basements that smelled like mildew and old promises. He worked as a dental hygienist at the time, bringing in stable money while I built our future, one service call at a time. I remember coming home after midnight, hair damp from sweat, my shirt smelling like metal and sewer water, and him standing there in the kitchen with dinner still warm. You smell like a drain, he'd say, wrinkling his nose. But he'd say it while handing me a plate. Back then, It sounded like love. The first year almost killed me. I worked 7 days a week, unclogging toilets at 2 a.m., replacing water heaters, crawling under houses, fixing burst pipes in the dead Ohio winter with my fingers numb inside cheap gloves. I learned to keep my voice calm even when customers yelled, because a good reputation isn't something you buy, it's something you bleed into day after day. By year 5, I had 3 employees. By year 10, I had 12. My company became a name businesses trusted in Columbus. We had contracts with office buildings, restaurants, 2 shopping centers, and a regional hospital. The kind of jobs that meant predictable income. The kind of work that felt like proof. I did it. I built something real. When our twin daughters, Emily and Olivia, turned 5, I bought our first real house. A yard, a swing set, a driveway that didn't crack in winter. Not the cramped apartment where we'd started. Michael quit working when the girls started school. He said he wanted to focus on being a parent, managing the house, keeping everything running smoothly so I could keep building the business. I didn't question it. Why would I? Our life fell into a rhythm that felt permanent. I'd leave at 5 a.m., coffee scalding my tongue, the world still dark. I'd kiss him while he pretended to sleep. He'd get the girls ready, handle the calendar, keep the house polished and perfect in a way that made me feel like my effort was visible. He joined a country club, started playing tennis, made friends with other spouses whose partners owned businesses. I told myself it was good that he had his own world, his own circle, his own happiness. The girls grew up smart, sharp-eyed, ambitious. Emily wanted to go into medicine. Olivia liked math, engineering, anything that had an answer you could prove. I started saving for their college from the day they were born. Separate accounts, protected, untouchable. I wanted them to step into adulthood without debt, without fear. Then, little things changed. Michael started a Thursday book club when the girls were in high school. Just us discussing literature, he said, too casual. You wouldn't be interested, Linda. Too much feelings talk. He wasn't wrong. I preferred blueprints to gossip. Then came the legal seminars. He said he wanted to understand business better, to help me. He looked proud saying it, like he was finally stepping closer to my world. One night over dinner, he set his fork down and said, "We should update our estate planning. The business is worth so much now. We need to protect the girls' future." I remember feeling something like gratitude rise in my chest. After all those years, he still cared about what we built. He'd found an attorney through his country club connections, Marla Brennan, Harvard Law, specialized in business structures and asset protection. Her office smelled like leather and expensive wood polish, and her handshake was confident in a way that made you feel like you were already lucky just being in the room. "Linda," Marla said, smiling like we were old friends, "you've built something impressive. Let's make sure it's bulletproof." The paperwork was thick. Trust structures, transfers, shelters, words that felt like a foreign language. Michael had already read everything. He'd placed sticky notes where I needed to sign. "It's just paperwork, honey," he said, warm and patient. "This protects us." And I believed him because he was my husband of 22 years. Because he was the father of my daughters. Because I still thought betrayal was something that happened to other people. Not to women like me. Women who worked until their hands cracked. Who built empires from nothing. Who came home every night thinking the house was safe. But safety, I learned later, is sometimes just an illusion you pay for with your trust. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. They just didn't look like danger at the time. They looked like normal life. After the estate paperwork, Michael changed in ways I couldn't quite name. Not dramatically, not in a way that triggered alarms, just subtly. Like a room where the furniture has been moved an inch to the left, and your body knows something's off before your mind does. He started asking more questions about the business, not the day-to-day work. I'd talk about a boiler replacement or a hospital contract, and his eyes would glaze over. But the numbers. How much is the company worth now? What percentage do you technically own? Are there any vulnerabilities if someone sued? At first I felt proud. He sounded invested, interested. like a partner finally leaning in after years on the sidelines. But the questions kept coming, and they were always specific, too specific. Sometimes I'd come home exhausted, shoulders tight, brain still buzzing with invoices and employee schedules, and he'd be sitting at the kitchen table with documents spread out. "I was just reviewing some things Marla sent over," he'd say casually. "I highlighted a few parts you might want to revisit." Marla. Her name started coming up more and more. Marla dropped by the house to save us time. She brought expensive wine, complimented the renovations, laughed at my jokes, asked about my growth strategy like she was a friend, not someone billing by the hour. "You should teach a business course," she told me once, standing in my backyard with a glass of wine in her hand. From nothing to millions, that's the American dream. I remember feeling seen. That's the part that still makes my stomach twist. I liked her. Meanwhile, Michael started changing his routines. The book club ran later. Tennis became a daily thing. There were texts he'd flip face down when I walked into the room. Not dramatically, just enough to register if you were paying attention. I wasn't. I was busy. I was always busy. The business was expanding. New contracts, new hires, problems that required immediate decisions. I told myself that marriage didn't need constant vigilance, that trust meant not auditing your spouse's behavior like a balance sheet. Then came the comments. Small ones. "You work too much," Michael said one night, his voice sharp instead of teasing. "I work so we can live like this," I replied, gesturing vaguely around the kitchen. He didn't answer. Another night, after a charity dinner at the club, he said, "The other spouses don't disappear for 14 hours a day. They're present." I laughed it off. "I'm building something for our daughters." "They already have everything," he said. "You're the one who needs to feel important." That stung, but I told myself it was stress, resentment, growing pains after 2 decades together. Even my daughters noticed the tension. "Why does Dad seem mad all the time?" Olivia asked once, folding laundry beside me. "He's not mad," I said too quickly, "just adjusting." Emily wasn't convinced. She watched. She always did. Then Michael suggested something that should have stopped me cold. "For tax purposes," he said lightly, "it might make sense for me to hold majority ownership of some assets, just on paper." Marla agrees. I remember freezing, my fork hovering over my plate. "Why?" I asked. "To protect you," he replied smoothly. "If someone goes after the business, they can't touch everything if it's structured correctly. You trust me, right?" I did. That was the problem. I trusted the man who shared my bed, the father of my children, the person who'd watched me bleed for that business and still kissed me goodnight. So I signed again. More documents, more sticky notes, more reassurances. The air in the house changed after that. Michael stopped pretending to care about my exhaustion. Marla stopped being friendly and started being confident. Like someone who already knew the ending of a story I was still reading page by page. And somewhere deep inside me, quiet, almost embarrassed, a thought surfaced. What if I'm missing something? I pushed it down. Because questioning your marriage feels like questioning gravity. You don't do it unless something has already gone terribly wrong. I didn't know then that the ground beneath me had already started to give way. I just felt the house getting colder, and I told myself it was winter. The last normal day of my marriage was a Monday in March. Nothing about it stood out. That's what still haunts me. I kissed Michael goodbye in the kitchen while the coffee brewed. He was scrolling on his phone, thumb moving too fast, smile too practiced. "Long day?" I asked. "Always," he replied, not looking up. I went to work, solved problems, signed checks, walked job sites, answered calls from contractors who trusted my word more than any contract. I came home to a house that smelled like pot roast and rosemary. We ate dinner in front of the TV, talked about Emily's graduate school applications, argued lightly about whether Olivia should consider engineering programs out of state. We went to bed at 10, like we had 1,000 times before. Tuesday morning, everything ended. When I pulled into the shop, Tom Russell, my foreman of 15 years, was standing by the door. He didn't joke, didn't ask about the schedule. He just held out a thick envelope, his hands shaking. Some lawyer-looking person dropped this off, he said quietly. Told me to give it to you immediately. The paper was heavy in my hands, too heavy. I didn't open it right away. I walked into my office, closed the door, sat down. Then I read. Divorce papers. 63 pages of carefully crafted destruction. Emotional abuse. Financial manipulation. Hidden assets. Neglect. A version of me that had never existed. Cold, controlling, selfish. Every accusation written with surgical precision, designed not just to end a marriage, but to erase a reputation. My chest tightened. My vision tunneled. I drove home faster than I ever had, barely aware of the red lights I ran. The house was quiet when I burst through the front door. Too quiet. Then I saw them. Michael was sitting at our kitchen table, the one where our daughters had eaten cereal for 18 years. And beside him, close enough that their knees touched, was Marla Brennan. Her hand was covering Michael's. "Hello, Linda," Michael said calmly, like I'd just come home from work. "What is this?" I held up the papers. My hands were shaking now, uncontrollably. "The end of pretending," he replied. "Sit down. We should discuss this like adults." I stayed standing. "How long?" My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. Marla opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "I'm not talking to you." Michael lifted his chin. 18 months. The room tilted. "You've been..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Marla helped me understand what I was really worth," he continued. "What I deserved." My stomach dropped. "And our daughters?" "They know," he said smoothly. "We told them last week. They understand. They see how you prioritized work over family for 20 years. That was the first knife. My daughters. My reason for everything. They had known for a week while I'd been going to work, planning their futures, completely blind. "Get out of my house," I said to Marla. She stood slowly, straightening her jacket. "Actually, it's Michael's house." My heart slammed against my ribs. "What?" "You signed the papers," she said gently, pulling out her phone. "Asset restructuring. 6 months ago." The second knife. I turned to Michael. "You told me that was for protection." "It was," he said. "Mine." "The business is mine," I said, desperate now. 51% belongs to Michael, Marla replied. "You transferred majority ownership last year, for tax purposes." The third knife went in deep and stayed there. I looked at my husband, no, my enemy, and saw something I'd never seen before. Contempt. "I planned my freedom," Michael said coldly. 22 years of pretending to admire you, of defending you. "Do you know what the women at the club called you?" I didn't answer. "Linda the drain woman," he sneered. "And I had to smile and defend you." Marla showed me what real success looks like. The room felt too small, like the walls were closing in. That afternoon, I hired a lawyer, a decent one, Lawrence Chen. He read the documents, his face draining of color. "Linda," he said quietly, "these are ironclad." I didn't know what I was signing. "That's not a defense," he replied. "You're a successful business owner. No judge will believe you didn't understand." The divorce lasted 8 months. 8 months of watching my life be dismantled in court. Michael's attorney, Marla's partner, presented me as a monster, a tyrant, a woman who had hoarded power and crushed everyone around her. They brought in accountants, witnesses, even a judge who seemed to have already decided who I was. My daughters wouldn't answer my calls. When the final ruling came, I stood there while the judge awarded Michael everything. The business, the house, the accounts. Outside the courthouse, Michael laughed. "Enjoy poverty," he said. "Maybe it'll teach you humility." I watched him walk away with the woman who had engineered my destruction, and I didn't know yet that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the point where everything burned down. Shock doesn't arrive like a wave. It seeps in. Quiet, heavy, unavoidable. In the days after the ruling, I moved through the world like someone underwater. Sounds muffled, movements delayed, emotions distant but crushing. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't collapse in some dramatic, movie-worthy breakdown. I just stopped knowing who I was. I sat alone in the parking lot outside the courthouse long after Michael and Marla drove away. People passed by with their coffee cups and briefcases, their lives continuing as if mine hadn't just been erased with a judge's signature. 22 years. Gone. When I finally drove home, his home now, I stood in the doorway and realized I didn't belong there anymore. My clothes were still in the closet, my toothbrush still by the sink, but the space felt hostile, like a place that tolerated me temporarily. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because I was told to, but because the bed felt like a lie. The first thing I did was try to fix it. That's my instinct. Always has been. I replayed every document I'd signed, every conversation, every moment I'd chosen trust over caution. I blamed myself for being busy, for being tired, for believing that love meant you didn't have to read the fine print. What kind of woman signs away her life without reading? That question haunted me. Lawrence tried to manage my expectations. "We can appeal," he said gently, "but the odds aren't good." Michael's version of events had already taken root. In court, in our social circle, in my daughter's minds. Emily sent one text. "I need space." Olivia sent none. I packed what I could fit into my old truck. Clothes, personal papers, the toolbox my father had left me. Michael stood in the doorway watching, arms crossed, expression bored. "You don't have to make this dramatic," he said. I didn't answer. 3 weeks later, the truck was repossessed. I watched from across a grocery store parking lot as they loaded it onto a flatbed, the sound of metal straps tightening around the last thing that connected me to the woman I used to be. That night, I traded my anniversary watch, worth $3,000, a gift Michael had given me years earlier, for a 2008 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles and a heater that only worked on high. The Civic became my home. The first night sleeping in it, I cried silently until my chest hurt. Not because I was hungry, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't understand how everything I'd built, everything I'd believed in, had evaporated so completely. Homelessness strips you down fast. You learn which rest stops are safer, how to rotate parking spots so security doesn't notice you, that truck stops have showers if you can spare $10. That dignity becomes something you ration. I didn't tell anyone, not my brother, not my mother, not my daughters. Shame is heavier than hunger. I worked day labor jobs, loading trucks, painting apartments, moving furniture for people who wouldn't meet my eyes. At 49, my back screamed every night. But pain was familiar. It was manageable. Hopelessness was worse. The hardest part wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was seeing my own business trucks around Columbus. Patterson Plumbing Services, my name, my logo. Driven by strangers. Once I watched them service a hotel contract I'd negotiated years earlier. The technician used cheap parts I would have never allowed. I wanted to say something, to correct him, but I didn't. It wasn't mine anymore. Tom Russell found me one night at a rest stop. He knocked softly on my window and handed me $200 like he was committing a crime. "The business is falling apart," he said. "Michael doesn't understand it. Half the contracts are gone." "Not my problem," I replied, but we both knew that was a lie. Winter came early that year. Ohio cold isn't polite. It finds you, creeps through metal and glass. I ran the engine for heat until the gas gauge dipped too low, then curled into a sleeping bag rated for temperatures I never reached. Some mornings ice formed on the inside of the windshield from my breath. Food became a schedule. Church lunches, Salvation Army dinners, cold beans stretched into 2 meals, crackers saved for when the hunger clawed too hard. 6 months in, I forgot what hope felt like. My phone, kept alive through a government assistance program, became just a clock. No one called. No one needed me anymore. Depression when you're homeless isn't dramatic. It's lying still for hours, staring at the roof of your car, wondering when you became invisible. But something in me refused to die. Maybe it was my father's voice. Patterson women don't quit. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was the stubbornness that had built a business from nothing. That Tuesday afternoon, when I was rejected from a construction crew for being too much of a liability, I drove to the rest stop outside Dayton, counted my $17 3 times, and opened that can of beans that tasted like defeat. Then the phone rang, and for the first time in months, something cut through the numbness. Confusion. Fear. Possibility. I didn't know it yet, but that call from Alaska wasn't just about land or money. It was the moment my life stopped shrinking and started fighting back. The phone call didn't give me hope. Not at first. Hope implies comfort, softness, something you lean into. What I felt instead was pressure. Because once Lindsay from Alaska said the words oil deposits and $20 million, everything inside me tightened. Not with excitement, but with terror. $47,000. 72 hours. If I failed, I wouldn't just stay homeless. I would lose something I never knew I had. Something my uncle had guarded for decades without telling me. That night, I didn't sleep. The Civic was parked behind a truck stop outside Dayton, semis rumbling like distant thunder. I stared at the ceiling fabric sagging above me and ran the numbers over and over, like maybe repetition would change them. $17 in cash. No credit, no assets, no one who thought I was worth trusting. And a deadline ticking toward Friday at 5 p.m. Alaska time. I opened the email Lindsay sent. Deeds, tax records, geological surveys. It was all real, painfully real. The maps showed my uncle's land sitting between 3 active oil operations, like a forgotten puzzle piece everyone suddenly needed. Letters from oil companies followed, certified, urgent, aggressive. They'd been trying to find me for 3 years. 3 years while I was still married, still trusting, still signing papers I didn't understand. I thought about Michael, about Marla, about the way they'd taken everything and told me I deserved poverty, and something shifted. Not anger, clarity. This land, this miracle, had nothing to do with them, and I was not going to lose it. I scrolled through my contacts. Most names were ghosts. Former employees who wouldn't answer, friends who'd chosen sides, numbers I hadn't touched since before courtrooms and sleeping bags. Then I saw my brother's name. Kevin Patterson, my younger brother, the responsible one, the one who'd warned me about Michael years ago, the one who'd built his dental practice quietly, without drama or illusion. He'd called twice while I was living in my car. I'd let it go to voicemail. The shame of calling him now felt like swallowing glass. But shame was a luxury. Oil doesn't wait for pride. I pressed call. It rang twice. Linda? His voice was immediate, concerned. Jesus, I've been trying to reach you for months. Where are you? I closed my eyes. I need help, I said. The words scraped my throat raw. Not for me, for Dad's memory, for Uncle Walter. There was a pause. Not suspicion, not hesitation. How much? He asked. No lecture, no judgment, no conditions. 47,000, I said. I can explain everything, but I need it by Friday or I lose something worth a lot. How much is a lot? About 20 million. He exhaled sharply. Okay, he said. You'll have it tomorrow. Where do I send it? I slid down in the driver's seat and cried for the first time in months. Not quietly, not carefully, but in broken, gasping sobs that shook my ribs. Wednesday morning, I stood inside the Anchorage County Records office, wearing the only clean clothes I had left. My hair was pulled back too tightly, my hands shaking as I slid the cashier's check across the counter. Lindsay Martinez looked exactly like she sounded on the phone. Sharp-eyed, efficient, and slightly amused by the chaos unfolding in her usually quiet office. Cutting it close, Miss Patterson, she said, stamping the receipt. The auction was scheduled for Friday at noon. What happens now? I asked. Now, she replied, handing me a thick folder. You own 340 acres of very valuable Alaska land. Free and clear. My phone buzzed before I could even thank her. Unknown number. Alaska area code. Miss Patterson, this is Richard Foster from Western Oil Corporation. We've been informed you cleared the tax lien. We'd like to meet immediately. Within an hour, I was sitting in a Denny's off Highway 3, the only place that felt neutral enough, across from 3 executives in tailored suits. I hadn't showered in 3 days. They treated me like royalty. That was when I understood power, not money. Power. They needed me. Richard slid a folder across the table. We're prepared to offer $22 million for the mineral rights. Another executive, a woman from Arctic Reserve Energy, laughed sharply. Don't insult her. $24 million, immediate payment. The third man, older, silver-haired, waited. Then he said calmly, Miss Patterson, you can name your price. I surprised myself with how steady my voice was. $30 million. Plus royalties. Silence. Then a smile. By the time we shook hands, the deal was done. And somewhere deep inside me, the woman who had slept in her car for 6 months stood up straighter. Because for the first time since the courthouse, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And nothing, no one, was taking this from me. People assume the darkest moment is when everything is taken from you. It isn't. The darkest moment is when you're standing at the edge of something that could save you, and you're terrified you don't deserve it. The night after the meeting at Denny's, I sat alone in the Honda Civic again. The contracts weren't signed yet. The money wasn't in my account. Nothing was guaranteed. All I had were promises. And I'd learned the hard way what promises were worth. The parking lot was quiet, dusted with frost. My breath fogged the windshield in slow, uneven bursts. I held the folder of documents against my chest like it might disappear if I let go. $30 million. Royalties. A future that didn't involve cold beans and borrowed showers. And instead of relief, my chest filled with dread. Because what if this was another illusion? Another setup? Another moment where I trusted the wrong people and paid for it with everything? My mind went where it always did when I was exhausted. Backward. To the courtroom. To Michael's voice, calm and precise, describing me as controlling. To Marla's hand resting possessively on the table like she already owned the room. To the judge's eyes sliding past me as if I were background noise. I remembered standing there while my daughters sat behind Michael, their faces closed, unreadable. I remembered thinking, this is what it feels like to be erased. What if this money didn't change that? What if I rebuilt everything and still lost my daughters? What if wealth didn't heal the damage betrayal had carved into me? The Civic suddenly felt too small. I stepped outside, my boots crunching on frozen gravel, and leaned against the hood. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from something deeper, fear. Because at rock bottom, survival is simple. Eat, sleep, endure. But the moment you glimpse escape, the stakes multiply. Now I could fail again. My phone buzzed. A text from Kevin. You okay? I'm here if you need anything. I stared at the screen. How do you explain that you're afraid of being saved? I didn't reply. Instead, I walked back to the driver's seat and opened the glove compartment. Inside was a folded receipt. $47,000. The back taxes. I'd kept it on purpose. Not as proof of payment, but as proof that I'd come this close to losing everything twice. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. I don't trust myself, I whispered to the empty car. Because somewhere along the way, I'd started to believe Michael's voice in my head. That I was only valuable when I was useful. That without the business, without the money, without the grind, I was nothing. What if I took this deal and proved him right? What if I built a new life and still felt hollow? That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my daughters turning away, heard Michael's laugh outside the courthouse, felt the cold metal of the Civic beneath my spine. By morning, my hands were numb and my thoughts darker. I imagined signing the contracts and something going wrong, a clause I didn't understand, a loophole I missed, a betrayal disguised as opportunity. I imagined calling my daughters and hearing doubt instead of relief. I imagined becoming rich and still being alone. At dawn, I sat up suddenly, heart pounding, because I realized something that stopped my spiral cold. Nothing they could take from me now would be worse than what I'd already survived. I'd lost my marriage, my business, my home, my reputation, my sense of safety. I'd slept in my car through an Ohio winter and lived to see spring. If this deal fell apart, I wouldn't die. But if I walked away because I was afraid, I'd be choosing to stay small, choosing to believe I was only meant to endure, never to rise. The darkest moment wasn't fear of losing the money. It was the temptation to stay invisible. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket and sat up straighter. For the first time since the divorce, I wasn't thinking about Michael or Marla or revenge. I was thinking about me, the woman who built a company from nothing. The woman who survived betrayal without becoming cruel. The woman who was still standing. By the time the sun rose fully, spilling pale light across the parking lot, my hands had stopped shaking. Whatever happened next, I would face it await, not hiding, not shrinking, and not apologizing for surviving. The shift didn't happen with fireworks. It happened quietly, like a door closing behind me without making a sound. Thursday morning, my phone rang before sunrise. Unknown number. For a split second, my stomach tightened. Old reflex. Old fear. I answered anyway. "Miss Patterson," a calm male voice said, "this is Robert Kane from Summit Petroleum. I wanted to speak with you directly before we finalize anything." I sat up straighter in the driver's seat. "Go ahead." "I won't insult you by pretending this is charity," he continued. "We want your land. We've wanted it for years. Your uncle knew exactly what he was sitting on." My chest tightened at the mention of Uncle Walter. "He never developed it," I said slowly. "No," Robert replied. "He protected it, paid taxes when everyone else wrote it off. He outlasted speculation cycles, market crashes, and impatient men who thought quick profit was the same as wisdom." There was a pause. "Frankly," he added, "people like your uncle are rare. People like you, even rarer." Something in his tone was different, not flattery. Respect. "We're prepared to meet your terms," he said. $30 million for mineral rights, 3% royalties, $10 million wired within 72 hours. The rest upon final transfer. My fingers tightened around the phone. "And the contracts?" I asked. "Clean," he replied. "You'll have your attorneys review them. You'll control surface rights. No forced relocation, no hidden clauses." Then he said something that changed everything. "You should know, we ran background checks before this meeting. We're aware of your divorce, the legal misconduct, the investigation that's quietly forming around Marla Brennan." My breath caught. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Robert said evenly, "you've been lied to by professionals before. I don't intend to be one of them." After the call ended, I sat there in silence. For the first time since the courtroom, someone with power had acknowledged the truth without me having to prove it. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't incompetent. I wasn't the villain Michael had painted. I was a woman who had been targeted and survived. I drove straight to Denver that morning, not to celebrate, not to spend, but to protect myself. The law firm Kevin recommended occupied the top floors of a glass building downtown. No leather and whiskey theatrics, just clean lines and sharp minds. The senior partner, Marcus Chen, read the divorce decree slowly, carefully. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "The irony," he said quietly, "is almost poetic." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Because your ex-husband took everything in the divorce," he explained. "He legally separated himself from all future assets. In his greed, he made sure he could never touch this." My chest tightened. "So he has no claim?" "None," Marcus said. "Inheritance and post-divorce acquisitions are fully protected, ironclad." For the first time, I laughed. Not bitterly, not hysterically, but with relief so sharp it almost hurt. The universe hadn't rewarded Michael's betrayal. It had sealed him out of the very fortune he would have destroyed. I signed the contracts 2 hours later, not shaking, not doubting. My name flowed across the page, steady and sure. That afternoon, Kevin drove up from Michigan. His BMW pulled beside my Civic in the parking lot of the law firm. He stepped out, took one look at how thin I was, how tired, and hugged me so tightly I had to grip his jacket to stay upright. "Why didn't you call sooner?" he asked softly. "Pride," I admitted, "the expensive kind." I showed him everything. The land, the deal, the wire confirmation pending. He read in silence, then looked up at me with awe. "That man, Uncle Walter," he said slowly. He saved you. Friday at 3:07 p.m., my phone buzzed. Wire transfer confirmed. $10 million. I stared at the screen. Then I sat back in the driver's seat of the Civic, the same seat I'd cried in, slept in, nearly disappeared in, and let out a breath I'd been holding for months. I didn't scream. I didn't celebrate. I just whispered, "Okay, I'm here." That was the moment the power truly shifted. Not because I had money, but because I finally believed, deep in my bones, that I was allowed to have a future again, and no one could take that away. Money doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives quietly, numbers changing on a screen, while the world around you stays exactly the same. The morning after the transfer hit my account, I woke up in the Honda Civic at the same rest stop outside Dayton. Frost still lined the edges of the windshield. My back still ached. My phone still felt too light in my hand for what it now represented. $10 million. I stared at the balance again, half expecting it to vanish if I blinked too long. It didn't. The first thing I did wasn't extravagant. I checked into a Holiday Inn. Not a luxury hotel, not a suite. Just a clean room with a locking door, a bed that didn't require folding myself into angles, and a bathroom where the shower stayed hot as long as I wanted. I stood under that water for almost an hour, not scrubbing, just standing there while months of truck stop sinks, paper towels, and cold mornings washed away. When I finally stepped out, my hands were trembling because I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd been holding together with sheer willpower. The second thing I did was call my daughters. Emily answered on the third ring. "Mom?" Her voice was cautious, guarded. "I'm not calling about money," I said quickly, "or your father. I just wanted to hear your voice." Silence, then a soft inhale. "Tom Russell told us he saw you. He said you were living in your car." "Not anymore," I said gently. "Things are changing." I didn't tell her how much money I had. I didn't explain Alaska or oil or contracts. I told her I loved her. That was enough to open the door. Olivia joined the call 10 minutes later. Then the questions came. Not accusations, but hesitations. Pieces of their father's story that hadn't quite fit. Details that never aligned. I didn't interrupt. I let the truth surface on its own. That weekend, I drove past my old business for the first time since the ruling. A for sale sign leaned crookedly in the yard. The parking lot was empty except for one truck, my original van, rusted and forgotten behind the dumpster, like an artifact no one knew the value of. Tom had been right. Michael had destroyed in 18 months what I'd spent 22 years building. I didn't feel satisfaction, just distance. Monday morning, the fallout began rolling outward, away from me, toward the people who'd caused the damage. Marla Brennan was arrested 3 weeks later. Federal charges, wire fraud, conspiracy. A pattern that extended far beyond me. 4 other cases, same playbook, same manipulation. Always successful women. Always trust used as leverage. She was disbarred before the trial even began. The judge who'd ruled so decisively against me resigned quietly for personal reasons. When the investigation revealed campaign donations tied directly to Marla's firm, the local news ran the story for days. I watched from my hotel room, remote in hand, feeling nothing. No triumph. No revenge. Just a calm certainty that truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. Michael tried to call. Once. I let it go to voicemail. The business collapsed fully by the end of the quarter. Contracts gone. Staff reduced to 3. The house was listed, then relisted at a lower price. According to Olivia, he drank more now. Complained about unfairness. About how the world had turned on him. I felt no urge to correct him. I wasn't interested in punishment. I was interested in freedom. I paid Kevin back 20 times what he'd lent me. He tried to refuse it. I didn't let him. "You didn't just lend me money," I told him. "You gave me my life back." I bought a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Denver. Paid cash. Furnished it simply. A bed that didn't fight my spine. A couch that didn't smell like exhaust. A kitchen where beans came from a pot not a can. When my daughters visited 2 weeks later, they stood in the living room looking confused. "You could live anywhere," Emily said. "Why here?" "Because I learned the difference between having money and needing to prove it," I replied. The final piece fell into place quietly. I established the Walter Patterson Foundation with $5 million in initial funding. Its purpose wasn't wealth. It was rebuilding. Helping people, women like me, who had lost everything to betrayal, manipulation, and legal warfare, find their footing again. The first recipient lived in her car, just like I had. When I handed her the check, she stared at me like I was unreal. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. "Because someone I barely knew once helped me," I said. I never saw Michael again. The last time our paths crossed, at a gas station off High Street, our eyes met across the pump island. He looked older, smaller, worn in a way that had nothing to do with money. He opened his mouth to speak. I finished pumping my gas, got in my truck, a reliable one, nothing flashy, and drove away. The fallout wasn't loud. It was final. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the courtroom. Peace. People think healing is dramatic. A moment. A realization. A clean break between who you were and who you become. It isn't. Healing is quiet. It's waking up in a modest apartment and realizing you're no longer bracing for disaster. It's making coffee in a real kitchen and noticing your hands don't shake anymore. It's understanding that peace doesn't announce itself. It simply stays. I keep 3 photos on my desk now. One of Emily and Olivia at graduation, standing side by side, confident, unafraid. Watching them rebuild their trust in me, slowly, honestly, taught me that love can survive lies if truth is patient enough. One of my father. He died when I was 12, but his voice never left me. Don't quit. Not when it's hard, not when it's humiliating, not when the world tells you you're finished. And one of Uncle Walter, the only photo I have, both of us standing in front of his rusted truck, holding fishing poles, his handwriting on the back, shaky but clear. Family is wealth that compounds over time. For 25 years, he paid taxes on land everyone thought was worthless. He never developed it, never sold it, never spoke about it. He just held it, waiting. Not for profit, but for a moment when someone in his family would need a miracle more than he needed money. That miracle didn't come when I was strong. It came when I was broken. The $32 million changed my circumstances, but it didn't save me. What saved me was surviving long enough to receive it. I don't live in a mansion. I don't drive supercars. I don't need to prove anything anymore. What I have now is freedom. The freedom to choose kindness without fear. The freedom to help others without losing myself. The freedom to walk away from people who confuse control with love. The Walter Patterson Foundation answers emails every morning. Stories from women living in cars, eating cold food, holding on to dignity by their fingernails. Every time I read one, I remember the rest stop outside Dayton, the dented can of beans, the phone ringing when I was ready to disappear. Rock Bottom has a basement. But even there, sometimes, there's oil waiting to be discovered. You just have to survive long enough to find it. The $47,000 tax receipt hangs framed on my wall now. Under it, a small plaque. The best investment I never knew I made. Because sometimes you have to lose everything to learn this truth. What was meant for you doesn't vanish when your life collapses. It waits patiently until you're strong enough to carry it.